Supercuts!
Life with nothing but a Bible and a bicycle, riding through the streets, spitting truth like a lyrical sniper. In this world of chaos, I'm breaking the cycle. They try to silence me, but I'm rage against the machine with every
Today we're diving into the opening of the Bible, Genesis 1. Now, many of us have been taught to read this text in a certain way, often shaped by interpretations made centuries after it was written. But what happens if we set aside those later views and try to see Genesis 1 through the eyes of its ancient author and audience? Let's take a fresh look.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Okay, how you guys doing?
Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk to you about the very first verse of the Bible. Very first verse of the Bible is generally mistranslated and then accordingly misunderstood and further misinterpreted.
Clause structure is the key to understanding why Genesis 1:1 through 3 can be taken a variety of ways. That's the key, and that's the thing nobody looks at unless you're a grammar geek, okay? Unless you're somebody who spends time doing, Hebrew things, working in the Hebrew text. Then you're confronted with it immediately. But in English Bibles, it just depends on the translation. A clause is, we kind of think of it as a sentence, a group of related words containing a subject and verb. It may or may not express a complete thought. A verb might be present, or it might be understood. You know about understood subjects and understood verbs, things that just aren't there in the text, but you kind of know because you know English that they belong there. Same thing happens in Hebrew. There are independent clauses, and these are clauses that contain a subject and a verb and express a complete thought. They stand alone. They don't need anything else to express the complete thought. Example. Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. It's a complete thought. It's not giving you the impression that you're missing any information in order to completely understand it. There are dependent clauses, though, that don't stand alone. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, what? It feels like there's something that is supposed to come afterward to complete the idea. Just by adding that one word, it has a sense of incompletion. It has a sense of lacking something else. This same situation happens in the first 3 verses of Genesis. There are a series of clauses, and the question is, which ones can stand alone, and which ones depend on the others for their meaning? So the question is, independent or dependent? And once we know that, we'll know what the main idea, the full sentence or sentences, we'll know what the main idea is or isn't.
First, let's tackle a big one. Does Genesis 1 teach creation out of nothing? Spoiler alert, it doesn't. The Hebrew text is pretty clear here. When God begins creating, the earth, Eretz, already exists. But it's not the planet Earth as we think of it today. Instead, it's described as a desolate, formless, uninhabitable mass. A tohu wabohu, floating in the midst of dark, chaotic waters. This watery chaos wasn't unique to Genesis. It was a common theme in other ancient Near Eastern creation stories as well. So what's happening here? God isn't creating matter from nothing, but is bringing order and purpose to a world that starts off as wild and untamed.
How many of you saw something like the dark universe set before you? It's like you're floating in the universe. How many of you saw in the midst of that dark space something like a sphere or globe? Anybody see a sphere or globe there? Quite a few of you. Yes. Yes. What was the globe doing? And my hunch is that it was doing something like Jell-O does when you set it on a table. Because what else does a earth that is formless and empty, hanging in the dark, do? And what covers the sphere or the globe? Well, it's dark, but also I'm guessing you keyed into the waters, the deep or the waters. So we've got an empty, dark universe with an undulating Jell-O globe that's covered in ocean water. How you guys doing? What is happening? What's going on right now? All right. Okay, so let's pause right here. Reading the Bible is fundamentally a cross-cultural experience. This first example will just make the point. Why do you have a sphere or a globe in your imaginations, many of you? Why is that the case? It's a very good reason why you have a globe. It's because, like, the 8th word of the Bible is the English word earth. And what does the word earth mean in English in its plain meaning? Are you with me? So it's very intuitive for modern Western readers. When we read our English Bible, there it is. God created the globe on the first sentence of the Bible. Now I just want you to pause. Just pause and ask yourself a question. How long have humans been capable of bringing that mental image of the thing that you and I live on as a sphere and as a globe? How long have humans had access to that image of the place where we live? So the first televised, like public images from satellites are from the early 1960s. And there were even some made in the 1950s, but they weren't made available to public. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. Here's my point. How old is page 1 of the Bible? Was it written in English, first of all? It was not written in English. It was written in ancient Hebrew. And it was written by an author who lived over 3,000 years ago. So let me just pause and it seems like a simple fact, but it's one of these simple facts that we don't actually let sink in when we open up page 1 of the Bible. So is it possible that in the language that this was written in, that we're supposed to have a completely different image come into our mind? Are you guys tracking with me? So what is it that would come to an author's mind 3,000 years ago when they used a word like this? And it's not complicated. It's very intuitive. If you study how these words, heavens and earth, track throughout the all ancient Hebrew Bible, other ancient Hebrew literature, it's very simple. It's the skies, what's up there, and what's down here. So in other words, there's no way that this author or that we need to envision that God somehow supernaturally planted the idea of a globe, for what modern people would think, into the mind of this. Why would we think that? There are some people who think that if I believe that the Bible is both a divine and a human word, that I need to somehow believe that like the mindset of these authors got hijacked and God could plant. But nowhere in the actual description of how the Bible came into existence do you ever get a description like that.
Next to John 3:16 for Christians, for God so loved the world, and so forth, Genesis 1:1 surely has to be the best known verse of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Yes, I think that's a mistranslation, and it in fact leads to an enormous and important misunderstanding of what Genesis is all about, and even what the Bible is all about, because it's not about the creation of the world, meaning the universe. Most people reading Genesis 1:1 would read it as, in the beginning there was nothing but God, and God then brought forth into existence the creation, expressed in this verse as the heavens and the earth. Admittedly, it's a very anthropocentric view of the earth being the center, but we would expect that from ancient documents. You could just say, well, the earth is the focal point of human beings, therefore you get Genesis 1:1. But actually, Genesis 1:1 is not about something from nothing or God existing in the beginning and all the questions of philosophy and physics and astronomy regarding why is there something other than nothing, and can something come from nothing? In the beginning, what was before God? Was there nothing? Was there something? If there's something, then it can't be God, because nothing could be before God, and so forth.
Now here's one way to look at the first three verses. I have the second verse in blue for a reason. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. What is the role of verse 2? Does it proceed from verse 1, or does it do something else? Do we have a sequence, a chronology? Or do we have, first verse 1 happens, God creates heavens and the earth. Then the earth was without form and void, as though that's the result of verse 1. And then verse 3 follows. It's a linear sequence. 2 is the result of 1, 3 follows 2. No kidding, Mike, it's 1, 2, 3. All right? Is that the way we're supposed to look at it? Now, traditionally, that is how Genesis 1 through 3 has been understood. 2 is the result of verse 1. That's the traditional interpretation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is viewed as the first creative act. God does something in verse 1. The result of that are the conditions we see in verse 2. The writer kind of lets us know what the result of God's creating in verse 1 was. And then he moves on to God getting down to business in verse 3. Okay, so God creates the heavens and the earth, and oh, by the way, when he did that, the earth was formless and empty, and all these conditions. And then God said, "Let there be light," and we get down to business. Okay, that's the traditional way of looking at it. So we have independent clauses in verses 1 and 3, and dependent in 2, and the dependent is the result. That's the relationship.
Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the author of Genesis 1. This wasn't just a random story. It was written during a specific time, shaped by cultural and historical circumstances. The Israelites, like their neighbors, were surrounded by stories about creation. From Egypt to Mesopotamia, every culture had its own spin on how the world came to be. But unlike the polytheistic myths of their neighbors, the author of Genesis 1 presented a radically different worldview. There's only one God, and this God, it brings peace and order out of chaos. This wasn't just theology. It was a statement of hope and identity. The Israelites were saying, our God isn't like those other gods. He doesn't need to fight or scheme. He speaks, and creation listens. Here's where it gets really interesting. In the 19th century, archaeologists digging in Nineveh found the library of Ashurbanipal, an Assyrian king. Among the ancient tablets they uncovered was the Enuma Elish, a Babylonian creation story that dates back at least 1,000 years before Genesis was written. The Enuma Elish has some striking similarities to Genesis 1. It begins with chaos, personified as a goddess named Tiamat, who is subdued by the creator deity. Then, the waters are separated, a firmament, the sky, is created, and dry land appears. Sound familiar? Even the concept of a divine rest at the end is there. But here's the twist. While Genesis 1 borrows the structure and themes of these older stories, it flips the script. The chaos in Genesis isn't a rival goddess. It's just raw material, completely under God's control. And instead of a pantheon of gods squabbling for power, we see one God, calmly and deliberately creating order. Now, does this mean Genesis 1 is just a copy-paste job of older myths? No, not at all. It's more like a remix. The author of Genesis inherited a shared cultural framework. Ideals about watery chaos, darkness, and forming habitable land, but reworked it to reflect a monotheistic faith in the God of Israel. This wasn't plagiarism. It was how ancient authors worked. They didn't see themselves as inventing something entirely new, but as participating in a larger cultural conversation. The creation account in Genesis isn't unique because of its structure. It's unique because of its message.
So what we shouldn't have in our minds is a globe floating in a universe. That's an extremely modern, imaginative picture. What's a perception of a human's experience of the earth 3,000 years ago? It's just very intuitive, right? It's actually yours that you experience every day. It's just land is what's under here on my feet, and sky is what's up there. And when did God make what's up there and what's down here? In the beginning. Well, when is that? Well, there's a handful of words that the author could have used to describe like a point in time. It would be the word techilah. But what the author has chosen to use is a word, Hebrew word reshit, that's quite vague in general. It's about as specific as our English phrase, way back when. So way back when, God made what's up here and what's down there. Now, let's get the story moving. And verse 2, we are off to the races. And do you see how in the first sentence of the Bible, most of the questions that we debate about are just totally ignored, completely ignored, and just dismissed? Well, when and how long and by what exact physical processes? I don't care about that. Let me get my story moving because I have some things I want to tell you about. it's humbling ourselves and recognizing the Bible isn't designed to answer all of my questions. And rather, what it's designed to do is to get me asking the questions that these authors think are important.
How you guys doing?
So back to Genesis 1:1. Here's my Bible. This is the standard, Revised Standard Version I've used for years. Open it up. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then we start the creation. So let me share my screen. Why Genesis 1 is not about the creation of the world. When I say the creation of the world, I'm using it the way I think most people use it when they talk about Genesis 1. In the beginning was God, and then everything else was brought forth. It's a kind of philosophical, theological, ontological statement, when actually it's not in the original Hebrew. But let's go back to the problem. Here's my Revised Standard Version that I just held up. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that goes back basically word for word to the venerable King James Version of the Bible, 1611 AD, CE translated. Notice, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. American Standard, 1901, same thing. ESV, NIV, all the modern translations, all the evangelical translations. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So notice that's pretty much standard fare all the way back to the King James right up into our own time, especially in Christian translations. And then you come to the 1980s, and the Jewish Publication Society put out a new version of their Hebrew Bible, the Holy Scriptures it's called, the Tanakh. And they had the courage to reflect something that has been discussed in Jewish circles going all the way back to the time of Rashi, which was in the 1000s or the 11th century CE, when he suggested that it should be translated as a temporal phrase. So what do we have? When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth was being unformed and void with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God was sweeping over the water. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, let's talk about the differences. The Hebrew word Bereshit, perhaps you've heard people pronounce that. It's the name of the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. Bereshit, in the beginning. But it's actually not in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, period. But it's a temporal phrase. It's in the construct case, as it's called, Bereshit, which means something along the lines of at the beginning, or literally at the first, because Berosh, Rosh means head or first, like the head. Beroshit, at the beginning of the, or at the first of the creation of God, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. So this is actually a phrase that's supposed to be a single sentence, verses 1 through 3. And the idea would be, what was the state of affairs like when God began to create or fashion or order or DNA engineer, if you want to use modern terms, this particular planet? So the focus is on this particular planet, not the rest of the universe. And it's not about the beginning of the planet, but it's about the beginning of the design, when God began to bring forth or create the heavens and the earth in the form that they were.
So here I have grayed out, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the translation we're used to. But now let's play around a little bit. What if I translated it this way? When God began to create the heavens and the earth. You say, well, that's cheating. You can't do that. Yes, I can. I have a PhD in Hebrew. I can do whatever. No, seriously, if you look in the Jewish Publication Society translation of Genesis 1:1, that's it. when God began to create the heavens and the earth. Now, is that a complete thought or an incomplete thought? That one's certainly incomplete because it's prepping something to follow. You're being prepped as a reader. So when you put the word when in front of it, you know that it's just leading to something. It's not an independent thought or act. It's leading to one that you haven't gotten to yet.
Let's keep on. Now, in the beginning, God created. What's up there? What's down here? Good news? Good story? Hooray! We love here, right? We love it down here. Now, what's down here was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. Now, whatever that means, and we'll poke at that a little bit, does that sound good to you? Does it sound like a place where you can build your home and make a garden and let your kids go play outside? No. Formless and empty. This is great. And this is where I will teach you a bit of Hebrew, because it's a wonderful little phrase. It's a poetic phrase the author uses here. Formless and empty is how it gets translated in our English Bibles for lots of reasons. It takes too long to explain. But here's the Hebrew phrase, tohu vavohu. Tohu vavohu. Why don't you practice saying it because you want to? Tohu vavohu. You see how it rhymes? It's both alliterative, matching syllables, bouncing off. It's really tohu vavohu. There's a Jewish scholar named Everett Fox, and he has coined the English phrase that I think is the best capturing of what's going on with tohu vavohu, and it's wild and waste. If you look at how these words are used elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, 9 times out of 10 they describe a desert, like a wild desert wasteland, uninhabitable. But here's what's fascinating. Look back again. So now the earth was wild and waste, like a desert you could never make your home in. But then what is the next sentence used to describe what's down here? This is the desert, and what else is it? 2 more things. It's dark, and the darkness is over what? The surface of the deep. What's the deep? It's an English phrase that means deep waters. Okay, wait. So what's down here? Is it a desert? Or is it an ocean? And the fact that if I see those as opposites means I'm getting off the plane in Berlin and saying, where's the McDonald's around here? So, because in our minds we're thinking, what is it? If it's an undulating globe, okay, well, no, scrap that. Scrap the undulating globe. So these words are trying to tell us something about the nature of the world. The nature of our world is that it is a chaotic, uninhabitable place.
What it's saying is he started with something unformed and empty, amorphous, like nature. Think of the moon and all the planets, and what we can see with our own observation and our telescopes and our various instruments. It's essentially a waste and void universe. So this planet was like that in this description. It was unformed and empty, and it was dark, and it was covered with water, and a wind was sweeping over it. And then God said, let there be light.
And so in the ancient, someone 3,000 years ago, in their imagination, what are the most uninhabitable environments for human beings, where you can't make a house and a park and let your kids go play outside? And if you know a map of just the Middle East, Israel sits on a green strip of land. To the east is the northern edge of the Saudi Arabian desert. It's one of the most desolate desert wastelands in the world. So that's right to their east, right? A biblical author would have a very good sense of tohu vavohu just by looking east over the Dead Sea. But then that strip of land is also bordered on the west by the Mediterranean Sea. And humans have been, out there floating in sailing ships for a very long time. Is it a place where ancient people could live, or even modern people ought to live permanently? Are you with me? Is our home in the sea? Do we belong in the sea? No. And is it a dangerous place for humans to go too often? The waves and the weird creatures will get you. Right? It's not our space. So God made what's up there and what's down here. So here's the thing, is that the earth is a raw and dangerous place. But is it a raw and wild and dangerous place everywhere? No, there are some places that are hospitable. Who's responsible for those? Let's keep reading. So in the midst of the chaos in the desert, who is there hovering in the midst of it all? In the midst of the dark, wild chaos, who's hovering there? Spirit of God. Now this is good. Put your hand in front of your mouth. I'm serious. Put your hand in front of your mouth and say hello. Hello? Now do you feel that? Do you feel that on your hand? Yeah. What is that? In English, what do we call that? Now look down. Do you see it? The thing that you feel on your hand, do you see? You don't. But is it real? Of course it's real, because you can feel it on your hand. So in it, we call that breath. In Hebrew, you call that ruach. Ruach. You have to clear your throat. Ruach. So here's what's fascinating. In English, we have 3 separate words for breath, wind, and spirit. In Hebrew, there's just ruach. Ruach, God's breath. God's personal life-giving presence that's invisible, but that results in visible results in the world, creates visible results. And so what, in the midst of the darkness and the chaos, who or what is there hovering? It's God's personal life-giving presence. And how did I get your ruach out of your mouth? I made you speak. What's the first thing God does in the narrative? The next thing, God speaks. So it's this image of God oversees the chaos. It's not out of his control. It's a part of our world. But at the same time, what God wants to do is to carve out in this chaotic world a space where life can flourish. And he does it by coming to be personally present through his Spirit and through his word, to begin to speak a space of order into existence.
So you picture light breaking into this incredible cloud cover. So the waters are separated, the dry land appears, the sky above is separated, and then you begin to get life in the sea, life in the air with the birds, life on the land, the plants, and finally, human beings. That's Genesis 1 through 2, verse 3. The creation hymn, as it's called.
What's the first thing God makes? Let there be light. Now, I've actually already preloaded the mental picture here by saying, what's the thing that God makes? And once again, in English, it makes perfect sense. In English, in our modern conception of the universe, is light a thing? Where does light come from? Not this light. This is just derivative light, right? So this derivative, so from the sun. Are you with me? The sun. Okay, so what is the light coming from the sun? Is it a thing? It is a thing. Like it's an actual thing. Yeah. So yeah, science nerds debate. Is it a little tiny package of energy? Photons is what scientists call this. Is it a particle, little bits of light? Or is it more like a radiating wave coming towards us? And I actually don't even understand how to debate the difference between those two, but I know that's a big thing that people talk about. Either way, is light a thing coming at us towards a huge ball of flaming gas really far away? Is it a thing? It is a thing. It's a thing. Let me just pause and just come back here once again. Let's get off the plane and look at our ancient Hebrew guidebook and say, what is God making here? God said, let there be light. And so God saw the light, that it was good, and he called it photon. Oh no, that's not what I read. Are you with me? What does God call the light? He calls it day. Now just ponder that. Don't debate about it, just ponder it. What is day? The word day, is it a thing? Is it a thing that you make? It's a period of time. It's a period of time. And time's not a thing. Time is like, it's a structure. It's a dimension. We call it a dimension. Fourth one, it's order. Order. So in other words, God isn't even depicted as making whatever it means for God to create. He doesn't have to make a thing. In this author's conception, creation is about the bringing into order out of chaos. And what's one of the most fundamental patterns of order that you can tank to the bank? As long as the universe is working, what do you know is going to happen in about 6 hours? It's going to get dark. And what do you know is going to happen about 6 to 8 hours after that? I mean, it's it happens every day. It's amazing, you know? Not everything happens every day, but some things do, and that's one of them. How? Where that? What's that about? Who's responsible for that? Right? It's just fundamental. Where are we? We're in a world that is both raw and wild, but is also ordered. And it's ordered in such a way that it's just it's made for us to come into existence here. And that's essentially what the rest of Genesis 1 is about. It's about how God breathes a word, order, into creation, and what emerges out of the chaos is a garden where humans can flourish. And because that's where the whole story is going. It's a drama about humans in God's good world. Are you with me?
So, if Genesis isn't about creating matter from nothing, what is it about? It's about creating order, form, and purpose. Think about it like this. When God separates the waters, names the sky, and calls forth dry land, He's assigning roles and boundaries. He's taking the chaotic, formless, tohu wabohu, and turning it into a world where life can thrive. It's like organizing a messy garage. The tools, the bikes, and the boxes were all there, but they were piled in a chaotic heap. Creation in Genesis is God stepping in and saying, "Let's get this place in order so something amazing can happen here."
So let me give you my translation. At the first of Elohim creating the skies and the land was desolate and emptiness, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the spirit of Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters. And Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So you see how it begins. Once you start at the first of Elohim creating the skies and the land, you got to just keep reading. It keeps flowing. It's not in the beginning God created the universe, period. But it's when God began to order and fashion this planet. So it is geocentric and anthropomorphic, as we would expect, but in a way that many have not understood. It has nothing to do with the creation of matter or anything, or when something came to exist rather than nothing. It's not about that.
Now let's put them side by side, or I'll get there eventually. We have, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Again, that's the traditional translation that most of us are used to. Hebrew, of course, was not written with any vowels. I have added a vowel here in red. If I was a Hebrew scribe using the vowel system that was invented at around the 8th century AD, those are the only vowels we have, those little dots and squiggles that you see on a Hebrew text, the vowel system. If I wanted to be sure that my reader would understand I'm talking about the beginning, in the beginning, I would use that little mark that looks like a capital T, and it would be pronounced Ba-Reshit. That's called in Hebrew the definite article. Just like English definite article, the word for the. Now, if I wanted to opt for when God began, it would look this way. It would be 2 dots underneath. And that means there is no definite article. It's a vocal cue that we don't have a definite article here. That would be Be-Reshit. Which one do you think is in your Hebrew Bible? The Hebrew Bible that everybody uses now, that has come down to us from centuries ago. The Dead Sea Scrolls do not have vowels. Vowels only start again in the Middle Ages. Which one do you think we get in Hebrew texts that have vowels? It's Be-Reshit. The translation, when God began to create, is a completely legitimate translation. So let's go back here. We got two possible translations. If we opt for the when translation, now look, I've changed the colors. Now we have dependent clauses. We don't have a series of independent ideas. We have two full verses of clauses that are leading up to something. And that something is verse 3, and that is the main idea. That's the independent thought. So here, just think about it. Read along with me or in your mind, and just think about how it sounds. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. It really has a different feel. It sounds like everything in verses 1 and 2 are just prep. They're not really happening. They're the writer describing what conditions, now catch this, the writer is describing conditions that already exist before God actually creates anything, before God actually speaks anything into existence. In other words, you have a situation where verses 1 and 2 lead to verse 3, and they set it up. The first creative act, the first thing God does in Genesis 1 through 3, in this view, is not verse 1. It's verse 3. That's the very first thing that God speaks into existence. This is strict Hebrew syntax. Syntax is sentence structure, sentence relationships. If you're going to just go by what the Hebrew says, like a zealot, strictly, obeying the rules of Hebrew grammar, that is what you get.
Page 1 of the Bible have caused an enormous amount of controversy, but look at what this author's done. This is so brilliant. What the author's done in the first 3 days, God's not making things. He's creating environments. He's ordering environments. Time. Day 2, weather. The waters above, the waters below. Agriculture. So, of all of the trees that could be mentioned on day 3, what get mentioned? Fruit trees. Fruit trees. Now I wonder, are fruit trees going to play a significant role in the next few pages or so? Like, yes, the whole thing's a setup for the garden, right? What about deciduous trees, conifer trees? Well, who cares? Like, the author just doesn't care, right? He's not telling us everything he could tell us. He's just telling us the things to get the story moving along the path he wants it to. And then watch what happens. Once these domains have been ordered, then each of the 3 days goes and names, where God names and appoints the inhabitants of those domains. So the sun, moon, and stars are the things that we can see that help us know and track the pattern that God has made. The fish and the birds live in the waters above and the waters below as the inhabitants of those weather realms. And then, of course, the land with the land animals and then humans. And there you go. Now, what we get hung up on is we see numbers and days, and we think, oh, I'm being given a chronology of the physical processes by which the world came into physical existence. Are you with me? Has it ever occurred to us to think that's just fundamentally not the question being answered here? The question is, do I live in a world that is ordered by a beautiful mind? Do I live in a world that's ordered by a beautiful mind? Answer, page 1. Yeah, how do I know? Well, that's what the whole narrative's about, and look at the literary design of the thing. Look how beautifully ordered it is. Do you see the literary shape of the chapter reflects the order that the author's trying to communicate here?
At the beginning of Elohim creating the skies and the land, something began to unfold. Here's how it was, and then it begins to unfold. So there you have a transparent English version of Genesis 1:1, rescuing it from it being lost in translation.
The opening of Genesis isn't just about the how of creation. It's about the why. It's a declaration that God is in control, bringing peace and purpose out of chaos. It's a message of hope, reminding us that even in the darkest, most chaotic times, Yahweh, God, can bring order and life. And here's the kicker. Understanding Genesis 1 in its ancient context doesn't diminish its power. It makes it even more beautiful. When we see how the author took familiar ideals and transformed them to reflect God's nature and purpose, it reminds us of how God works in our own lives. He meets us where we are, takes the chaos we're stuck in, and turns it into something good. So the next time you read Genesis 1, remember this. It's not just an ancient story about the beginning of the world. It's a timeless reminder that the God who brought order to chaos back then is still doing the same thing today, in creation and in us. Now, just because Genesis 1 is not a creation from nothing story, that doesn't take away from the fact that there is only one uncreated creator of all creation. But that's for another video. Let's keep watching and praying as we trust in His power to bring life and light to every corner of our lives. Until next time, Shalom, Shalom.